I'm gonna start making a definition of pronouns, but to begin with, we should make a quick reminder about the concepts of deixis and anaphora. Deixis is the identification of a person, objects, or activities, and so on in relation to the context created by the act of discourse. So it depends on discourse to have meaning. An anaphora is to make a reference of a word used previously in a sentence without any repetition, that is, replacing a word. So, pronouns are a category of words which is used both deictically or anaphorically. When we say he saw me, is a deictic use of the pronouns because you are identifying the person and the objects and the activities in relation to the context which you created in the act of speech. But an anaphoric use of the pronouns is, for example, in this sentence, call John and tell him to bring food. Call John and tell him. So you are replacing the word John, which is the subject, by him. So you're making an anaphora because you don't want to repeat that word. You don't want to make a repetition. Then you just replace the subject by the pronoun. The difference between nouns and pronouns is that pronouns provide a more limited range of dependence. Also, pronouns can form full noun phrases, as in the first example, he saw me, and they do not take determiners. Let's go to the categories. First, personal pronouns. They are classified according to the person, as we know, I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they, and etc. Then we have the inflectional forms, which divide into reflexive and non-reflexive. The reflexive are myself, yourself, himself, etc. And they are used when the pronoun and an antecedent are closely related. So, for example, Mary hurt herself. The reflexive pronouns have only a plain case form. Thus, there are no genitive cases. For example, you can't say Mary left herself's jacket at home. You can't say herself's, himself's, yourself's. You have to say Mary left her jacket at home. There are no genitive forms. The non-reflexive pronouns approach the plain case and the genitive cases. So, the genitive case is divided into dependent and independent. The independent are my, your, her, our, your, their, and the independent are mine, yours, hers, ours, yours, theirs. And that it is. But now let's talk about some words that are not. We have singular they, and it is important to mention the cases in which they is used as a singular form. For example, someone has left their jacket on the table. In this case, they is used as singular and it is gender neutral. So you don't know the gender of the person that is practicing the action, so you use they. For some speakers, singular they has a different reflexive form, themselves. So, for example, someone has locked themselves inside the house. Next one is the pronoun one. The word one can replace the article, it can function as an adjective and so on, but it can also be a pronoun. The pronoun one is impersonal and generalizing. In the US, it is more used in literature and it can be replaced by you, but in England, it's more commonly used. For example, there's this sentence, if one fails, then one must try harder next time. So you use the pronoun one to refer to a class or a bunch of people. Then we have there. There is actually a preposition, but it can also be used as a pronoun in some situation, and it has only a plain case form. It is able to occur as subject in an interrogative tag, such as, for example, there is a white house in the end of the street, isn't there? Tag, such as, for example, There is a white house in the end of the street, isn't there? And so it has an interrogative tag. Next one is all and both. All and both can be considered compound pronouns. For example, they called us all. She likes us both. They love us all. He loves us both. We have many examples of that, and these are considered compound pronouns. Next, we have reciprocal pronouns, and there are two reciprocal pronouns, each other and one another, and they have no difference in meaning. For example, you can say they hugged one another and they love each other. Also, they can remind us of the reflexive forms of personal pronouns because they're also anaphorically related. Later, we have interrogative and relative pronouns. The interrogative and relative constructions make a gender distinction within the pronouns between personal and non-personal. Non-personal divides into plain and genitive. Plain are the words what and which, and genitive is the word whose. Personal divides into nominative, which is who, accusative, which is whom, and genitive, which is whose. The interrogative version of interrogative and relative pronouns. The interrogative and relative constructions make a gender distinction within the pronouns between personal and non-personal. Non-personal divides into plain and genitive. Plain are the words what and which, and genitive is the word whose. Personal divides into nominative, which is who, accusative, which is whom, and genitive, which is whose. The interrogative version of whose is actually a determinative, not a pronoun, but is usually studied as one. Here we have some examples. Example of non-personal is, what did she do? A personal is, who did you see? So in non-personal, you say what, because you are not referring to a person, obviously. And in a personal, you say who, because you are referring to a person. Besides these forms, you have a compound in some cases, which is ever. For example, non-personal, you say whatever, and for personal, you say whoever. There are three words that are usually analyzed as pronouns, but are excluded from the pronoun category because they can take determiners. It is echo what and the pronominals one another. An example of echo what noun category because they can take determiners. It is echo what and the pronominals one another. An example of echo what is someone says, I told her about the issues. And the other replies, you told her about what? So the what is an echo because it refers to something you said in the previous sentence. The echo what is actually very different from the interrogative pronoun what because it is able to replace words of more or less any category and to take on the inflectional properties. As in, I bought 3 cars, and someone replies, you bought 3 what? You know, you even have the plural. And or I sold the car. You wanted the car? Like I didn't understand what you said in the previous sentence, so I'm replacing the word I didn't understand or I'm surprised by with what, so it's an echo. An example of pronominal one is someone asks, which movies do you enjoy? And the other answers, the ones about science fiction. So one functions as a pronoun there. And other has the same function. Someone asks, which books do you need? And they answer the 3 others. So one and other have basically the same function.
Okay, now we are going to focus on dixis and anaphora and the personal pronouns use. As Renata already said, pronouns are used dictically or anaphorically. He is waiting for you. Take a look at this sentence. He and you are examples of the dictic use because you don't know from the context, from the sentence, who he is or who you is. This sentence, Mary loves herself. Herself is an example of the anaphoric use because herself refers to Mary, which is in the sentence. Okay? But sometimes you have more than one antecedent in the sentence. So the anaphora may be ambiguous in those cases. For example, I need to tell John that Peter is coming to the party. He is going to enjoy it. Who is going to enjoy it? John or Peter? Okay? It's not clear from this sentence. The anaphora may be retrospective or anticipatory. It means that it can come before or after the antecedent. When the headmaster saw the damage, he called in the police. Or, when he saw the damage, the headmaster called in the police. Of course, this use is less common, is more formal. You can have an anaphoric chain when you have a lot of pronouns in a sequence. For example, my daughter told me that her car is giving her, my daughter, a lot of troubles recently. She, my daughter, thinks she, my daughter, may have to start riding her bike to work. Okay, so talking now specifically about the use of personal pronouns. As Renata already said, they are called personal pronouns because they are the ones to which the grammatical system of person applies. They are differentiated by reference to the uterine act roles of speaker and addressee. So the first person is used for the speaker or the group, including the speaker. The second person is used for the addressee or the group, including the addressee. And the third person is used for the residual category. But it should be emphasized that third person do not necessarily exclude reference to the speaker or addressee. It is possible to refer to myself or to the person that I'm speaking to in the third person. And I'm going to show you some examples. So third person as first person. Imagine this situation. I am talking to my friend Renata and I tell her, Anne is going to volunteer. And then Anne overheard that. She comes and she says, she is not going to do so. So this is an example of third person used as first person because Anne is talking about herself using she. Another example, the writer has to admit that he can't see the logic of this argument. Imagine a writer writing about an argument and he disagrees with this argument, so he could write like this to distance the criticism, to make it more polite. Your teacher feels sorry for you, but he is unable to give you a higher score in this test. So the effect here is the same. The teacher is talking to a student and he's distancing the language to be more polite or less direct, less aggressive. Third person as second person is also possible. A doctor could talk to a patient like this. How is young Francis this morning? Is he fine? Does Madam require anything further? Would she like something to drink? A person talking to, like a server, talking to his or her boss. The reader recalls that he or she has seen this in detail in chapter 2. So this could be seen in a book, for example. Third person as a set of speakers and addressees. The same applies where there is a reference to a set, to a group, rather than an individual. For example, all members of the cabinet agree that they support this proposal. In this case, one member of the cabinet is talking about all of them. So the correct would be we, right? All members of the cabinet agree that we support this proposal, but we're using the third person. The McCarthys is a rich family. They have owned this estate for 5 generations. So a person talking about her or his family using they to distance again. Everyone in the team is going to have to improve their performance. So imagine a team with a lot of players, and one of the players is talking about their performance. So, but he's not using first person, he's using third person. First and second person pronouns. Now we're going to talk about the uses of the pronouns, the primary uses. So I refer to the speaker, you to the addressee. As simple as that, as I had already said. We refers to 2 or more people. That includes the speaker. It can be inclusive when it includes the person that I'm talking to, or exclusive when it doesn't include. Examples. Why don't we go together instead of using 2 cars? So I'm talking to a friend and I'm using we, I, and you. We could lend you some money. Now I'm with my friend lending some money to another person. So this person is not included in this we. Let's. It's a common example of inclusively use of we, because this us, it's always inclusively. I'm inviting someone to do something, so it's I and you, the person I'm talking to, the addressee. Let's eat something, you and I. We has no limitation to the number of people it includes. So my wife and I have 2 kids. We love them, 2 people. When I was in kindergarten, we would draw all the time. We, the class, the group, 20 kids probably. In Brazil, we love to dance. So now we hear all of the Brazilians generalizing. We have more back problems than other primates. Now we, the humanity, all the humankind. You can also be used to a set of people. As you know, it could be used in plural too. The second person plural is distinct from the singular only in the reflexive form yourselves. All of the other forms are equal. However, there are dialectal forms that distinguish plural. For example, use in North America and you all, y'all in southern US. So the size and specificity can vary in the same way as was illustrated with we. So I can talk about you 2 people, or you 10 people. So now the secondary uses. So the first use that I'm going to highlight is we for single speakers. One example is when an adult talks to a child using the plural in a jokingly way. Give us a lick of your ice cream. The authorial we, again, to distance or to be modest, you could see in a book. In this chapter, we will describe the methodology used. We for addressee or third party, I think I already mentioned. How are we feeling this morning? We need to practice some sentences in the present perfect tense. Oh dear, we are a bit cranky today, aren't we? So I'm talking about the person that I'm talking to, but I'm using we to include to make my discourse more inclusive. The non-referential you is very common. We use to talk about everyone, and it's the same in Portuguese, so you can get fined for parking on the footpath. I'm not talking about you, but I'm talking about everyone. It was so noisy that you couldn't hear yourself talking. Again, not you, but everyone. Third person pronouns. While the first and second person pronouns are used dictically, the characteristic use of the third person is anaphoric. So if you see Paul, tell him, Paul, to come. I've just been talking to your sister. She seems depressed. What's that you've got there? Give it to me. I've made several mistakes, but they weren't very serious. So you can notice that I'm always referring to something that it's already in context. There will often be more than one nominal phrase to which the pronoun could be anaphorically linked. Typically, however, the content of the clause containing the pronoun will strongly favor one of the potential antecedents. So this links with the ambiguity part that I was mentioning, right? Liz told Jill that she was going to Paris. So here, it's obvious that it's Liz. Liz wouldn't tell Jill that Jill was going to Paris because it would be an obvious piece of information. Where there are no factors favoring one phrase as the antecedent, ambiguity is avoided by repeating it. So Ed was informed by Max that he, Max, was chosen to lead the group. Although the third person pronouns are usually interpreted via an antecedent, they certainly do not have to be. So for example, reference to contextually salient entity, when you have, for example, isn't she lovely? So she is referring to what? To someone that you're seeing. So in this example, it's a baby. Okay, so you look at a baby and you say, isn't she lovely? So the context tells you who the anaphora is about. There's no need for any prior mention. There is this, I don't know the pronunciation, quasi-anaphoric uses. For example, I went to the store, but he wouldn't sell me liquor. So he, in this case, you can know it's like the attendant, the assistant at the store, right? But I don't need to say it because it's obvious. So it's a quasi-anaphoric use. He who is now rare, but it's very familiar because it's very common in biblical texts. He who never made a mistake, never made a discovery. He, in this case, it's not only for men, okay? It's for men and women. And nowadays, in modern English, that is more common. That who never made a mistake, never made a discovery. Institutional and non-referential they. They is commonly used to refer vaguely to some unspecified institution or authority. So they've closed the bridge for repairs. You know that it's an authority. We don't need to know what specifically authority. Or I think this is what they call, I don't know this pronunciation, fait accompli, I don't know. So this, they, people in general, okay? Now, just very quickly, I'm going to talk about the semantic relations between pronoun and the antecedent. So you have the common one, no? Right? My father says he can lend us some money. We have indefinite antecedent, like one of your friends phoned, but she, one of your friends, didn't give her name. I bought some candies indefinite, but nobody liked them.
In this part, we are going to talking about some of the tribal Portuguese speakers may find while learning pronouns. First of all, many Portuguese speakers seem to get confused when they have to choose between I and me in a sentence. Let's start with an example. Which one is right and which one is wrong? First example, Mary met Joe and I at the mall. The second example, Mary met Joe and me at the mall. Through is both I and me are first-person singular pronouns, that is, they are used by one person to refer to himself or herself. The difference is that I is the subject pronoun, which expresses the one who is performing the action in the sentence. For example, the following phrase: I'm reading my favorite book. In the sentence, I is the subject of I'm reading. On the other hand, me is the object pronoun, used as the receiver of the action on the verb. He is an example. She told me not to worry. In this sentence, me is the object of told. If you have, for example, this phrase, Mary and me went out for dinner, Mary and I are the subject of the verb went. That is why we should use the subject pronoun I, and the phrase is correct like that. Now, on the contrary, if you have this example, Mary took Joe and me to the restaurant. Joe and me are the objects of took. Therefore, we should use me instead of I. Another case of tricky grammar is the he or she versus the situation. In English, a person's gender is explicit in the third person singular pronouns, such as he, she, his, hers. However, sometimes we can bump into this kind of sentence. Your child needs to think about their future. Some Portuguese speakers may find the word their confusing in this context. What do you mean their if we are talking about a singular subject? In the past, we used to have sentences like this: your child needs to think about his, emphasis to his, future. If a person wants money, he, emphasis no, he, will have to work for it. Nowadays, not using a gender-neutral pronouns as they can sound sexist. Another option is to mention he or she or his or her in your phrase. For example, your child needs to think about his or her future. If a person wants money, he or she will have to work for it. Some people won't agree with the use of plural pronouns in this situation, saying that it's no part of the grammar system. Actually, this strategy is used in English language since the 16th century. Those are good solutions to solve the tricky questions, and it is important to mention all these possibilities. While you teach English language to foreign speakers while speaking, we must not necessarily follow the rules so strictly. And we might find lots of English native speakers not following the rules through their speech.